On September 15, 1981, a 10-year-old girl rode her bicycle home from her cousin's house, but she never made it back. From that day on, one of post-war Germany's most notorious criminal cases has remained unsolved and controversial to this day. The Ursula Herrmann case. The girl in the box. Ursula Herrmann was born in 1970 in the small Bavarian town of Ecking am Ammersee, near Landsberg am Lech, Germany. She had a happy life with her parents, her two older brothers, Michael and Hans, and her older sister Isolde. As the youngest child, Ursula was bright, full of energy, and loved the arts, especially singing, painting, and most of all, gymnastics. She begged her parents to let her attend gymnastics classes every day. On September 15, 1981, Ursula spent the entire day at middle school in Landsberg am Lech. It was the very first day of the new school year and also her first day in secondary school. After school, she went home to Ecking, practiced piano with her 18-year-old brother Michael around 5 p.m., then rode her red bicycle to her regular gymnastics class in Schondorf, a small town about 5 kilometers away, separated from her home by a dense forest along the Ammersee Lakeside Road. When her gymnastics class ended, Ursula stopped at her cousin's house in Schondorf for dinner. At around 7:20 p.m., though it was getting late, it was still light outside. Ursula's mother called her aunt, asking that Ursula head home before nightfall, as the bike ride would only take about 10 minutes. Ursula left her cousin's house around 7:25 p.m., got on her red bicycle, and rode along the forest path toward home. But Ursula never arrived. Somewhere along that short forest trail, just a 10-minute ride, she vanished. That evening, when Ursula had still not returned home after more than 30 minutes, her worried mother phoned her aunt again. The aunt said Ursula had already left. Since Ursula rode this route every day, the family was sure she couldn't have simply gotten lost. Something had gone wrong. Perhaps an accident, or worse, a kidnapping. Both families rushed into the woods to search for her, calling out Ursula's name over and over. But there was no response. Within an hour, neighbors and police officers joined the search. As midnight approached and rain threatened, the search party was about to give up when a police dog found Ursula's red bicycle, hidden about 20 meters off the main path. The discovery gave everyone renewed hope, and dozens of officers scoured the woods and even searched the nearby lake. Radio stations broadcasted missing child alerts describing her as 1.43 meters tall, with short blonde hair, wearing a gray sweater, green suspenders, and reddish-brown shoes. Her father was a teacher, and her mother a homemaker. On the third day after Ursula's disappearance, her family began receiving strange phone calls. Her father answered, but there was no voice on the other end, only music playing. The melody was recognizable. It was a jingle used in advertisements on Bayern 3 radio. After several calls like this, the local police became suspicious and set up a recording system at the Herrmann's house to capture the calls. On the 6th day of her disappearance, Ursula's father received an anonymous letter. It had no signature and was clearly sent by the kidnapper. The message was assembled from letters cut out of magazines and newspapers to hide handwriting and fingerprints. It read, "We have kidnapped your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, pay 2 million Deutsche Marks in ransom." The letter also explained that when the kidnappers called again, they would play music but not speak. That would be the signal. The family was instructed to respond yes or no to paying the ransom. The letter warned that if the family contacted police or refused to pay, they would kill Ursula. On the 7th day, the first phone call came again with the same music signal. Ursula's mother immediately agreed to pay the ransom. but she asked for proof that her daughter was still alive, such as Ursula's nickname or the name of her favorite toy. The caller stayed silent and then hung up. That same evening, the kidnappers sent a second letter with more detailed instructions. Like the first, it was made of letters cut from magazines. Their demands were as follows. The 2 million Deutsche Marks had to be prepared entirely in 100-mark notes. The ransom delivery must be made by Ursula's father, who had to pack the money into a suitcase. He was required to use a yellow Fiat 600 to transport the ransom and drive at a speed of no more than 90 km/h. However, the kidnappers failed to specify where and when to deliver the money, promising only that they would call again later with instructions. The Herrmanns were not wealthy and struggled to collect such a large sum. But with the help of relatives and neighbors, they managed to gather the entire ransom amount, waiting anxiously for the kidnappers' next call. But the kidnappers never called again. Ursula's family waited more than 2 weeks for a phone call that never came. The silence was unbearable, not just for the Herrmann family, but also for police officers who had been waiting in ambush at the designated ransom drop-off spot. Finally, investigators decided they could not wait any longer. Hundreds of police officers, 10 tracking dogs, and local volunteers were mobilized for a massive search operation. They even used dowsing rods, a tool normally used for finding underground water, hoping Ursula might be buried somewhere. Just 19 days after Ursula's disappearance, officers searching the forest near Eking discovered something hard, buried under shallow soil. When they dug it up, they found a wooden box measuring 72 centimeters long, 60 centimeters wide, and 1.4 meters deep. When they broke the padlock and opened the lid, the officers' eyes welled with tears. Inside was the girl everyone had been desperately searching for. But Ursula was no longer alive. The devastating news was delivered to her parents by 2 police officers. Ursula's father kept asking whether his daughter was hurt, whether she had any injuries, whether she was still alive, until the officers could no longer hold back their emotions and confirmed the worst. Ursula had died between 30 minutes and 5 hours after being placed inside the box. The autopsy showed that her body bore no signs of struggle, which suggested she had been sedated or drugged before being locked inside. The cause of death was asphyxiation. In other words, she had died the same day she was kidnapped, long before the ransom letters arrived. Ironically, the box had been equipped to keep her alive for days. Inside were a small bench that could serve as a toilet, 3 bottles of water, 2 large packs of cookies, 12 cans of soda, 6 chocolate bars, 2 packs of chewing gum, and even 21 books, from Donald Duck comics to romance and horror novels. There was also a small light and a portable radio. A crude ventilation system had been installed with plastic pipes leading to the surface to provide fresh air. However, the designer of the box had failed to realize that without a proper air pump, oxygen would quickly be depleted. Wet leaves and rain may have also blocked the pipes, suffocating Ursula within hours. Police concluded that at least 2 people had to be involved. The box was too heavy and bulky to move alone, and the perpetrators clearly knew the forest well. Investigators focused on locals who lived nearby and frequently saw Ursula. One name kept coming up: Werner Mazurek, an electrical technician who lived with his wife and 2 children only a few hundred meters away from the Herrmann home. Mazurek was physically strong, but had a reputation for being hot-tempered and socially isolated. Importantly, he owed the bank over 140,000 Deutsche Marks, giving him a potential motive for ransom. When questioned, Mazurek initially could not recall what he had been doing on the night of the kidnapping. 24 hours later, he provided an alibi, claiming he had been playing a board game similar to Monopoly with his wife and 2 friends. Police searched his house and workshop but found no evidence. Forensic teams examined the box and found fingerprints on adhesive tape used inside. Thousands of locals, including Mazurek, were fingerprinted, but no match was found. In late January 1982, Mazurek and 2 friends were arrested and interrogated for days, then released due to lack of evidence. In February 1982, another man, Klaus Pfaffinger, came under suspicion. Under intense police pressure, he confessed that Mazurek had paid him 1,000 Deutsche Marks and a color TV to dig a hole in the forest in early September 1981. However, when police asked him to lead them to the site, he pointed to different locations each time and finally admitted he could not remember. He later recanted his entire confession, claiming he had been coerced. The investigation eventually stalled, and by the late 1980s, the case went cold. Still, the German media continued to refer to it as the girl in the box case, one of the country's most haunting crimes. In 2005, with the statute of limitations for kidnapping approaching, police reopened the case. DNA evidence was tested but yielded no match. Pfaffinger had died by this time, but Mazurek remained a suspect. In 2007, during yet another search of Mazurek's home, police discovered an old tape recorder. Forensic audio experts compared the clicking sound made by its buttons with the mysterious click heard during the kidnapper's phone calls in 1981 and concluded that they matched. This became the key piece of evidence prosecutors needed. Mazurek was arrested and put on trial. Throughout the trial, Mazurek insisted he was innocent. Neighbors and even some family members testified about his temper and erratic behavior. The forensic audio expert's testimony about the tape recorder was considered decisive by the court. In 2010, nearly 30 years after Ursula's death, Werner Mazurek was convicted of kidnapping resulting in death and sentenced to life imprisonment. For many, this verdict finally brought closure to one of Germany's most agonizing mysteries. But Ursula's brother, Michael Herrmann, was not convinced. He publicly questioned the evidence, arguing that the click sound was too generic and could have come from any portable tape recorder, not necessarily Mazurek's. He also pointed out that the ransom notes were written with poor German grammar, more like that of teenagers than adults, suggesting that the real culprits might have been youths or foreigners. In 2013, Michael filed a lawsuit seeking compensation for the emotional distress caused by the lengthy trial. He explained that this was not about money, but about keeping Ursula's case from being forgotten. In 2018, the court partially granted his request and awarded him $7,000. In a letter, Mazurek thanked Michael for doubting his guilt. Michael replied years later, "If you are innocent, I hope the authorities will continue to investigate so the real perpetrators can be found. But if you are guilty, then may you rot in hell." In March 2021, several German media outlets received anonymous letters in which the writer claimed to be the real killer, describing himself as a high school student in 1981 and stating that he committed the crime with friends. This revelation echoed Michael's long-held theory that youths might have been responsible. However, police took no further action because the case was already legally closed, and the authenticity of the letters could not be verified. To this day, the true circumstances of Ursula Herrmann's death remain one of Germany's most haunting mysteries, a tragedy that has left her family and the public with unanswered questions for over 4 decades.